The Morning Majority on 630.
Good morning. It is 7:07. You're with the Morning Majority. Let's get right to one of our favorite guys in the whole world, Bret Baier, the anchor of Special Report on your Fox News channel. He was going to be hosting Fox News Sunday this weekend. Bret, I can't imagine you'll have any difficulty finding things to talk about on Sunday.
Good morning, guys. Yeah, it should be interesting. A lot of politics, obviously, going around this week on the trail, and a lot of developments, obviously, with the economy and the president's handling of it.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about Syria and we'll talk about the economy here in a moment. But earlier this morning, Neiman and I were noting this story in China where the vice president has been pushed around. And he hasn't been pushed around, but some of the press corps that's been traveling with the vice president have been pushed around a bit. And it comes at the same time that apparently some of our basketball players from Georgetown University are being pushed around by a military basketball team in a very ugly situation. You know, Neiman and I are sort of the opinion that not much happens in China by chance. Do you read anything into this?
That's interesting. I mean, that's an interesting point. I think everything is scripted in China, all of those trips, all of the things that go on. Could it be that China's trying to send a signal that we're the big man on campus now and we hold a lot of your debt? And I wouldn't put it past the Chinese.
Yeah, it also
been there, and I've seen how they operate at negotiating tables, and nothing against the Chinese people, but the leadership there clearly sends messages that way.
Well, they've been sending messages about the economy, but they also have been sending messages with their military, with the buildup of the military, while we are talking about cutting ours back.
Yeah, in fact, they rolled out an aircraft carrier just last week, and the military, the missiles that they've really trained on American interests, and not only Taiwan but other places, and yet they are not, under threat from an outside force. Yet this buildup is happening exponentially in their military and at sea, and that's a concern for the U.S. Navy.
Bret, speaking of China, the New York Times reports today that many of the green jobs the president had hoped to create in America, that some of us were skeptical about creating, are actually happening in China. The president is also talking about this new infrastructure bank, or what have you, that he will create or introduce in September. Is there any sense of how they might tackle the green jobs issue, given that in many places it has failed pretty spectacularly to create jobs, that they'll back off of that or create a new message about that?
No, I mean, I think it's full speed ahead for this White House on this issue. You're right. They haven't materialized. Even these billions of dollars in training programs for green jobs have led often at the end of the training program to find someone that sees there really aren't these jobs out there.
Right.
It will happen if the government continues to subsidize it, and if the subsidy then stops, then perhaps the job stops. So the White House's point is you create this market, you give it a bump, and then the market takes over. So far, there's no evidence that that's happening, but there's also no evidence that the White House is going to stop this the effort.
Yeah, even at high subsidy levels, it's not creating jobs, so it's going to be a rough sell.
Yeah. It really is. I mean, you saw the president on these speeches in battery factories and solar factories and other places. I mean, clearly it's still on his radar.
The administration came out and said that the president of Syria, Bashar Assad, needs to step aside. I'm just wondering, and it's a difficult situation because if you say things like that, you have to, I guess, back it up. But what exactly does that mean, and how do you back it up, or can you?
Yeah, everyone believes fully that the military option is off of this table. And when you believe that, you take at least one of the things that the U.S. brings to the table often, or threatens, or could, which is military intervention or some kind of coalition that would go in and help the Syrians. That's not going to happen, by all accounts, all experts you talk to. So how do you make that happen? That's a great question. So far, our ambassador is still on the ground, and while it is symbolic that he's going to these towns where rebels are rising up, like Hamas, where civilians have been slaughtered. How you do it technically is very difficult. And James Rosen, our chief Washington correspondent, had a great give and take at the State Department yesterday, saying, the estimates now are at 1,800 civilians killed. And the questioning went something like, at what point did you decide to step up and say President Assad must step down? I mean, what happened to the 600th civilian, or the 800th, or the 1,200th, 100th?
Well, if it's a humanitarian effort to stop it in Libya, when does it become a humanitarian effort in Syria as well? And I mean, that's always out there. I've always wondered, how would the Bush administration have handled the Arab Spring? How would they have handled Libya? How would they have handled Syria? And just last night, I'm watching Neil Cavuto, and I see that there's a preview of a Dick Cheney special being put together by Bret Baier.
There you go.
I'm curious as to how that would have played out and what exactly you're going to unveil in this special.
Yeah, it's an interesting special. We've been working on it for a long time in the hopes to lead up to this book. Actually, it started well before his book rollout, and we talked to a lot of big players, including the former president, former Defense Secretary Rumsfeld, former Secretary of State, friends of his all the way back, his chief counsel David Addington, which I'm pretty sure people hadn't even thought he was ever on camera. And it's just an interesting hour. And that's a great question, Brian. I think how the Bush administration would have handled Syria and the Arab Spring is really one in which I don't know that there's an immediate answer, but I think that it would have there would have been a quicker response to some of the developments, at least judging by the Bush administration's past track record.
Bret, without a minute left, and I want to ask you this question. I mean, everybody says it's a cheap shot to attack a president because he needs to take vacation. Mary Catherine did a little search, some 60 days of vacation recently, and that's a lot of vacation. It comes after he's been in this Midwestern bus tour where he's trying to connect with the average worker, the average man on the street, and then he retreats to this little island called Martha's Vineyard where he rubs elbows with the rich and famous. Look, it's vacation. Everybody deserves vacation. But from a political standpoint, the optics of that don't look so good, do they?
No, definitely, Brian. And I wouldn't be surprised, actually, if it gets truncated a little bit just by the events and the situation. The President and the White House are clearly sticking to their guns here on this vacation, that the White House travels with him, that the presidency is always on the move. But you're right, Martha's Vineyard is a different image. And you'll remember when President Clinton was going for re-election, 1995. He, at the advice of, I think, Dick Morris, chose not to go to Martha's Vineyard, but went to Wyoming and went to a dude ranch. He then went back to Martha's Vineyard after he got re-elected. So I do think there is an image issue, and whether that plays out or somehow factors into how long this vacation is, we'll see.
All right. Bret Baier, the host and anchor of Special Report and doing Fox News Sunday this weekend in Chris Wallace's absence. Thanks for joining us.
Okay.